And there we go. Okay. So we'll wait for just a few more people to show up. Welcome everybody on Twitter, and welcome to everybody on Facebook as well. Start recording. Okay. So I want to welcome everyone who's watching this live and everybody who's watching this later on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining me. This topic, Matthew 12:40, and the chronology of the Passion, or the Passion chronology, the Last Supper chronology, whatever you want to say, is a huge topic, and one that most people don't agree on. It doesn't matter who you ask, especially in the Hebrew Roots and the Messianic movement. It seems like nobody really agrees. Nobody finds common ground even. So I don't expect to clear anything up for really anyone, or maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't expect to change anyone's mind. And if I do clear something up for you, then that's great. I have a specific idea of the way that I think things went in during the Passion chronology, and so this is all how this whole thing is basically how Matthew 12:40 fits into all that. I'm not going to attempt to try to talk specifically about the entire Passion chronology, because we're going to do that on the Rob and Caleb show on April 12th with Dr. Brant Petrie. He wrote the book Jesus and the Last Supper, and so we're going to have him on, and he'll I hold to the same chronology that Dr. Petrie does. And so this is actually more of a preliminary to kind of show how the Passover hypothesis, which is the chronology that I hold to and Dr. Petrie holds to, how Matthew 12:40 fits into that. And so, yeah, that's basically what we're going to do today in this live stream. I don't think that I'm going to change minds. I already said that. Who am I to talk about this? No one. I'm really not anyone to talk about this. I'm a student at Torah Resource Institute. I help run the publishing company for Torah Resource Institute, and that's about it. I'm blessed to be able to study the Bible a lot because of my job, and yeah, but really that's all the credentials I have. None really, but maybe we'll discuss this, and you'll either agree or disagree, and that's totally fine. So let's get into it. Basically what I've done, the way that this is going to go, I'm going to, I've written a lot of my ideas down so that I can hold to to kind of a script. I'll stop throughout this, and I will attempt to look at comments. I'm going to pull up my comments here right now, and I'd like to say hello to everyone in there. Good to see everybody who's online right now. Okay, so I'm going to get started here. And here are some of my thoughts. The chronology of the Passion Week is one of the more fiercely non-salvific issues debated today. Even among scholars, the Passion chronology is one of the most written on topics in Jesus literature. Although recent scholarship has been put forward that is beginning to settle some of the various aspects of these conflicting views, I say that. I think people might disagree with me on that, but that's my view. Interestingly, even scholars that disagree on the Passion chronology tend to agree that Yeshua died on a Friday afternoon and rose on a Sunday. Now, that's not across the board, I admit, but I would say the majority of scholars agree with that Yeshua died on a Friday, rose on a Sunday. Many within the Messianic and Hebrew Roots circles have chalked this up to the misleading of the Catholic Church. But this is simply not true. The theory that Yeshua died on a Wednesday is gaining more and more traction in the Messianic and Hebrew Roots movements, but the majority of scholarship has rejected this view due to specific language used in the Gospel of John and the Synoptics, especially the account found at the end of, or in Luke, rather, which we will discuss below. The point of this live stream is not to discuss the Passion chronology in depth, as we'll do that with Dr. Petrie on the upcoming Rob and Caleb show, but the goal is to look at Matthew 12:40 and attempt to understand how this verse can line up with other accounts within the gospel narratives. So once again, I'm not going to go super in depth into the various chronologies, but I will touch on them a little bit. So why do scholars think that Yeshua rose on a Friday instead of Wednesday. Now, for those who've seen some of the more provocative posts that I've made on my Facebook page recently, you'll know some of the arguments that I have against a Wednesday death of the Messiah. So, for instance, one of them is in John. We have a chronology that tells us that Yeshua, he rode, basically, if you do the math, Yeshua would have rode into Jerusalem on the donkey on a Shabbat. Well, that would violate the command to let your animals rest on Shabbat. And so that's just one of the small reasons that I would say a Wednesday chronology doesn't work. But I'll give you some more right now. So why do scholars believe that Yeshua died on a Friday? Well, we see in Luke 24:1 that the women went to the tomb on the first day of the week. That's Sunday. Okay, at early dawn, and Yeshua was no longer there. Later in the chapter, we are given a very specific time marker. And it says, "And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem." Then later on it says, "But we were hoping," the two men that are talking to Yeshua says, "But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened." And then later on in verse 21, they say, "But they urged him, saying, 'Stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over.' So he went in to stay with them." So we know that this is in the middle of the day on Sunday, and they say it is the third day. So if we count back from Sunday, Saturday being the second day, and then Friday would be the first day since these things happened. Okay, so another reason many Christians, so that's one of the reasons that scholars would say that Yeshua died on a Friday. Another reason many Christian scholars have taken the view that Yeshua was crucified on a Friday is because of the presence of what seems like 2 preparation days in a row. And here we go. We have Matthew 26:17. "Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?'" Well, the only time that you can prepare to eat the Passover, and more specifically the Passover lamb, is on Nisan 14. So this would be a preparation day. Again, in Mark 14:12, "On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, 'Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?'" And then in Luke 22:7, "Then came the first day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. After the Last Supper, the night has passed. Yeshua is taken to Pilate in the morning, then crucified." John states, "On the day that he's crucified, then the Jews, because it was the day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away." Now, I'm not going to argue this point right now. I know that a lot of people are going to say that wasn't a Friday, that John's account wasn't a Friday. But if we have Yeshua having the first day of unleavened bread, the day that the Passover lambs are sacrificed, so we have that in 3 accounts. And then if John, which would be a preparation day, if John tells us that the next day was a preparation day, that's 2 days in a row. The only time you can have 2 preparation days in a row is when Nisan 14 falls on a Thursday, and then the next day is the preparation day for the weekly Shabbat. That's the only way I can reckon it. Now, I know that people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. We're not going to try to work that out right now. That's something that we'll talk about more with Dr. Petrie. Let me just take a look here. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's see here, where was I? Okay, so we'll discuss this more in depth, Passover special, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so if these arguments seem straightforward, why have so many within Christian, Messianic, and Hebrew Roots circles rejected a Friday crucifixion? One verse has been pointed to time and time again, and that verse is, of course, the verse that we're here to discuss, which is Matthew 12:40. And I'm going to start a little bit earlier, so this is in 39 through 41. "But he answered and said to them, an evil and adulterous," this is Yeshua talking, by the way, "an evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah, the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up with this generation at the judgment and will condemn it because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here. So this seems like a slam dunk for the reason why Yeshua couldn't be in the grave on a Friday, right? Or that he had to be in the grave on a Friday. He couldn't have died on a Friday. Because if he rose on a Sunday and we count back 72 hours, it's certainly not Friday, right? 3 days and 3 nights would not bring us to Friday. He would have to be put into the grave before this. And of course, I think this is what most of the people who are watching right now believe and agree with, is that Yeshua couldn't have died on a Friday. I will tell you the end of my presentation at the beginning, and then I'll tell you how I get there. I fully believe that Yeshua died at 3:30, right around 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, and rose on a Sunday morning. That's what I believe. And now I'm going to tell you why I believe it. Okay. So the question that arises in the length of time Yeshua was in is the length of time Yeshua was in the earth. From the outset, we have seeming difficulties with this passage. If we take Matthew 12:40 literally, then Yeshua would need to be in the grave for no less than 72 hours, right? So 3 days and 3 nights. If we're going to actually take it literally, then he has to be in the grave 72 hours. Herbert Armstrong has put forth what might be seen as the most fearful effort to defend a 72-hour burial in his article titled "The Resurrection Was Not on Sunday," published by Ambassador College in the and actually you can find this online. It's totally free, and so you can go online and just look up "The Resurrection Was Not on a Sunday" by Herbert Armstrong. And so this is his whole thing, is his whole little booklet is on this. So Armstrong states, he, that is Yeshua, expressly declared that the only sign he would give to prove he was the Messiah was that he should be just 3 days and 3 nights in the rock-hewn sepulchre in the heart of the earth. Jesus staked his claim to being your Savior and mine upon remaining exactly 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. If he remained just 3 days and 3 nights inside the earth, he would prove himself the Savior. If he failed in this sign, he must be rejected as an impostor. So Armstrong really, he's not joking around. He thinks that if it wasn't exactly 72 hours, if it wasn't 72 hours, if he was in the grave less than 72 hours, then he wasn't the Messiah. And that's a pretty bold statement. However, Scripture itself seems to directly contradict this. And so let's look at some of these. Matthew 16:21, from the time Yeshua began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised up on the 3rd day. So not after the 3rd day, but on the 3rd day. And then Luke 18:33, and after they have scourged him, they will kill him, and the 3rd day he will rise again. Acts 10:40, God raised him up on the 3rd day and granted that he become visible. 1 Corinthians 15:4, and that he was buried and that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. So it seems like there is this seeming contradiction within the Gospels themselves, right? And we'll even get to other Scripture. Matthew himself writes very specifically that it was after 3 days. Okay. So, Armstrong realizes this seeming contradiction. So if we are to take Matthew 12:40 literally, then Yeshua could not have risen on the 3rd day, as anything after 72 hours is no longer the 3rd day, but the 4th day. So if he's really in the grave 72 hours, right? 3 days and 3 nights. If we take Matthew 12:40 literally, then he didn't rise on the 3rd day. He rose on the 4th day, because anything after 72 hours would be the 4th day, not the 3rd day. Armstrong realizes this seeming contradiction and attempts to deal with it. And he states, notice now, Mark, this is a quote, by the way, for those on Twitter, notice now, Mark 9:31, they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise on the 3rd day, or the 3rd day. The duration expressed here must be between 48 and 72 hours. It could not be 1 second past 72 hours, and Jesus still rise the 3rd day. And in John 2:19 through 21, he's quoting Scripture now, Jesus answered and said unto them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. But he spake of the temple of his body, to be raised up in in 3 days after being destroyed or crucified and buried could not be more than 72 hours. If we are to accept all the testimony of the Bible, we must conclude that Jesus was exactly 3 days and 3 nights, 3 full 24-hour days, 72 hours in the grave, or the only supernatural proof he gave must fail. I apologize for not giving you a page number, but that is once again in Armstrong's same booklet. Okay, so at least Armstrong notes. Okay, wait, hang on, let me go back. Armstrong argues then that Yeshua was dead for exactly 72 hours, down to the second. His claim is that if Yeshua was in the grave exactly 72 hours, this gives truth to both statements in Scripture that Yeshua would be in the grave 72 hours and that he would raise on the third day. The problem with this is apparent. There is no time of the day where it is both the third and the fourth day at the same time. Armstrong's argument does not hold up. So let's think of it this way: if it's December 31st at 11:59 and 59 seconds, it's December 21st or 31st, right? As soon as it hits 12 o'clock, it's no longer the 31st. It's not the 31st and the 1st at the same time. And this is essentially what Armstrong is trying to argue. He's trying to say, well, it was both the third day and the fourth day at the same time, and that's how we can line up Scripture. But I just don't understand how he can attempt to argue this. It doesn't hold up to me. But at least Armstrong notes the apparent contradiction and attempts to deal with it. Many who hold to a literal 72-hour duration within the grave don't even give a suggestion on how to reconcile the various accounts. Indeed, even the Gospels themselves seem to contradict each other on this. Note the passages above where we looked, and Matthew, Luke, and John say on the third day, but Mark says something different. And let's see here. He says, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." And that's in Mark 8:31, and in Mark 9:31 he says, he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. So it seems like Mark is disagreeing with this idea that he would raise on the third day. It should be noted quickly that there is a textual variant in Mark 9:31, so that's the second one, and I've left that up there for you for just a second so you can take a look at that. Although some manuscripts say on the third day, the weight of the original leans towards after 3 days. And I can, if people want to know what I mean by the textual weight leans towards after 3 days, then you can email me. I'd be happy to discuss why that is. So it has been argued by Ray McGinnis, and this is kind of a rabbit trail, but I wanted to put this in there just so that I'm trying to show all the different ideas, because I want people to realize that I'm not trying to pass over anything. I'm trying to be honest with what various scholars have attempted to put forward in terms of these passages. So it's been argued by Ray McGinnis that these passages in Mark are actually counting from the time Judas plotted to betray Yeshua on Nisan 14. Linguistically, he might have a good argument for this, and I mean, he's a much better linguist than me. However, I do see some possible problems with his argument. When speaking about the Greek word honestane and its connection to the story of Jonah and Yeshua's authority, McGinnis writes, "This understanding gives a clue towards the proper understanding of the phrase after 3 days. This has traditionally been interpreted on the basis of other similar phrases to refer to 3 days after Yeshua's death, but it seems to be me more likely to refer to 3 days after that action which began Yeshua's rejection, his being handed over. The beginning of the triumph of Yeshua would be 3 days after the beginning, sorry for the typos, for the beginning of the rejection of Yeshua." So he might have a good argument for this linguistically. Although McGinnis might be onto something, this does not negate the fact that Matthew also uses the phrase after 3 days in chapter 27, and we'll look at this in just a few minutes. But first, let's move back to Matthew 12:40, and I want to talk about the sign of Jonah. So Matthew 12:40 is not the only place that speaks of the sign of Jonah. And I'm sure that most of the people watching this right now already know this, but we're going to read it anyway. An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given it except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and went away. That's Matthew 16:4. And this is, obviously 12:40 is where we find Matthew talking about the sign of Jonah again. And then, of course, in Luke 11, he says, as the crowds were increasing, he began to say, this generation is a wicked generation. It seeks for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. So, several things should be noted here. First, in both cases, time is not referenced once. If the actual sign of Jonah was a 72-hour period in the grave, as Armstrong has so forcefully suggested, why does Matthew leave it out the second time he speaks about it, and Luke leaves it out entirely? If the sign of Jonah is really 72 hours in the grave, like that's the sign, then why in the world would Luke leave it out altogether? Second, Luke tells us that Jonah became a sign or a miracle, and it's the same word in Greek, to the Ninevites, just like Yeshua will. Did the Ninevites believe Jonah because of a time period? So in other words, did they see Jonah and say, oh, you were gone for exactly 72 hours, so that must mean that we should listen to you? No, I don't think that's what they saw. The sign was not that he was gone for 72 hours, but rather that something miraculous had happened. And Samuel Bacchiacchi believes something else is going on as well. He states, the vast majority of commentaries consulted agree in viewing the sign of Jonah as being primarily the sign of Christ's resurrection. Norval Goldenhuis, I don't know if I'm saying that right, for example, writes in the New International Commentary on the Gospel of Luke, Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites because he appeared there as one sent by God after having been miraculously saved from the great fish, as it were raised from the dead, as a proof that he was really sent by God. So also, Yeshua will be his resurrection. Yeshua will by his resurrection prove conclusively that he has been sent by God as the Christ, the promised Redeemer. So Bacchiacchi, who, by the way, for those who don't know who Samuel Bacchiacchi is, he is a Seventh-day Adventist scholar, and he keeps a Saturday Sabbath. He's a great scholar who has written some really good works. From Sabbath to Sunday is, I think, one of the ones that most Messianics would probably know the best. So Bacchiacchi's point is well taken here. The people of Nineveh did not see Jonah and say, you were gone for 72 hours, so that must be the sign. No, in the same way, the miraculous work of Christ, raising from the dead, was the sign that Yeshua gave, not a length of time. And Paul makes this clear as well, okay? He says, Paul, and this is in Romans 1:1-4, Paul, a bondservant of Christ Jesus, called as an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his Son, who was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh, who was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead, according to the Spirit of holiness, Jesus Christ our Lord. It doesn't say who was declared the Son of God with power by being in the grave 72 hours. Or even who was declared the Son of God with power by being in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. No, it says was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead. And so my point here is simply that I don't believe the sign of Jonah is a literal 72 hours in the grave. In his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, R.T. France looks at the language throughout Matthew and the entire book of Matthew, and he concludes the different phrasing of the 3-day period compared with the third day of Matthew 16:21, 17:23, 20:19, 27:64, and the after 3 days of Matthew 27:63 is due to the Septuagint wording. But in Semitic inclusive time reckoning, these do not denote different periods as a pedantic Western reading would suggest. The resurrection of Yeshua will therefore demonstrate a correspondence between him and the prophet Jonah, each miraculously released from death. In Jonah's case, it was a virtual death, but in Yeshua's case, it would be actual death. So I hope I'm making that clear. But I will keep going. Even if we accept that the sign of the Messiah was his resurrection and not a time period, we still have to deal with the language found within the Gospels themselves. Not only do we have passages within the Gospels that say Yeshua would rise on the third day, but the two passages in Mark are not the only place we see the Gospels say he would raise after 3 days. Let's take a look now at Matthew 27. And let me get to my slide here. Sorry, this is I'm trying to produce this at the same time as talking. So, Matthew 27:62 through 64. Now, on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days, I am to rise again.'" Going on, in 64, "Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people," so on and so forth. So if he was really supposed to be, basically, if they really believe that he was supposed to rise after 3 days, then why do they only want the guards there until the third day? That doesn't make too much sense to me, because you would think that they would want the guards there, obviously, until the fourth day if he was supposed to rise after 4 days. Interestingly, this is not the only place in Scripture we find this kind of language. In fact, we find it in the Tanakh as well. So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Now Joseph said to them on the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God." So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there. Well, I thought they were in the prison for 3 days. This is in Genesis 42:17 through 18, and then verse 26 as well for those on Twitter. So, and then this passage here is 1 Kings 20:29. So they camped one over against the other 7 days, and on the seventh day the battle was joined, and the sons of Israel killed of the Arameans 100,000 foot soldiers in 1 day. So the idea that we can say 3 days, he would be in the grave 3 days, and then he rose on the third day. We have the same kind of language found actually right there within the Tanakh. Josephus also seems to use the same phrasing here, although this is debatable in the Greek grammar. We see Josephus use the exact same Greek words and phrasing as the Gospels. So I want to try to be clear with this. In the Gospels, it's the exact same Greek phrasing, exact same words, everything as in Josephus. And so I think there's a really good case for Josephus actually using the language that I've put here, which is he also appointed Maas for the captain of his forces and gave him the same high office which Joab before had. And he commanded him to gather together out of the tribe of Judah as great an army as he could and come to him after 3 days, that he might deliver to him his entire army and might send him to fight against Sheba, the son of Bichri. Okay, and then in the next verse it says, "Now while Emmaus was gone out and made some delay in the gathering the army together, and so was not yet returned, on the third day the king said to Joab, 'It is not fit we should make any delay in this affair of Sheba, lest he get a numerous army about him and be the occasion of greater mischief.'" But that's not it. There's another passage as well in Josephus. "But Rehoboam told them they should come to him again after 3 days, after 3 days' time, when he would give an answer to their request." So this goes on, and I'll leave this up here for a few seconds. But then in the next verse, it says, "The king was pleased with this advice and thought it agreeable to the dignity of his government to give them such an answer. Accordingly, when the multitude came together to hear his answer on the third day, all the people were in great expectation." Well, I thought he said it was going to be after 3 days. For those who are on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, you can go to the Facebook link and see the slides that I have here as well. For those on Facebook, you can jot down the references and look them up yourself if you'd like to. Okay, so it seems clear that the overwhelming amount of verses in the Bible, along with Josephus, indicates that the phrase "after 3 days" was a shorthand for a period of time and not an exact length of 72 hours. Or even what we think of today as being after 3 days, it is clear that the writers of the Apostolic Scriptures seem to understand this phrase as not being 3 days and then something happening after the third day ends. So, in other words, not having to happen on the fourth day. We have seen how the phrase after 3 days might be a shorthand for something else, but what about the time phrase that is given in Matthew 12:40? This is different, obviously, right? So he doesn't say after 3 days. The text uses language that is a bit different. The verse does not read, just as Jonah was in the fish and after 3 days went to Nineveh, so too the Son of Man will be in the grave and after 3 days rise. It doesn't say that, does it? The language seems more specific, 3 days and 3 nights. So the question that I have, I think the question we all have to ask, do we find this same kind of phrasing elsewhere? And the answer is, yes, we do. This is 1 Samuel 30, 12 through 13 for those on Twitter. They gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins, and he ate. Then his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" And he said, "I am a young man of Egypt, a servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind when I fell sick 3 days ago." So was it 3 days ago, or was it 3 days and 3 nights? But, again, this is Esther 4:16 and 5:1. "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." Now, it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's room, and the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. So it seems to me that we have the same wording in the Tanakh. Although much later, it is interesting to note that the later rabbis agree that any part of a day constitutes the entire day. Now, what I did here, I am fully aware that to cite the Talmud at this point, the Talmud does not enlighten us on the first century Judaisms. I get that, and I even have a quote here. After these quotes, I have another quote, which is going to be later rabbinics, 1700s rabbinics. And so I'm not trying to say that this informs us of first century. What I'm trying to do now is I'm just trying to show that actually Judaism from the first century on, even up until more modern rabbinic literature, believes this same thing. Okay, and so let's take a look at the Talmud. So first of all, the Jerusalem Talmud, this is in Jerusalem Talmud Sabbath 9:3. "A day and a night are an ona, a portion of time, and the portion of an ona is as the whole of it." So this is the Jerusalem Talmud. Now, I didn't put the context in because, we'll get to that in a few seconds. And then the Babylonian Talmud in Pesukim 4a. "Rob was the son of Rabbi Hia's brother and the son of his sister. When he went up thither, he," that is Rabbi Hia, "asked him, 'Is Abu alive?' 'Ask me whether my mother is alive,' he replied. 'Is your mother alive?' asked he. 'Is then Abu alive?' he replied. Thereupon he, Rabbi Hia, said to his servant, 'Take off my shoes and carry my bathing things after me to the baths.' From this 3 laws may be inferred. 1. A mourner is forbidden to wear shoes. 2. On a delayed report of death, that is the mourning, is observed for 1 day only. And 3. Part of the day is as the whole of it." Okay, so we see, and obviously, like I said, this is not supposed to inform our understanding of first century Judaisms. However, it shows that Judaism continued to believe this throughout time. The passage in the Jerusalem Talmud is quite graphic in sexual nature, and I don't think that there are any children watching this right now. However, I still don't really want to get into why the Jerusalem Talmud was talking about days and nights, because it is extremely graphic. If you would like to go look it up for yourself, I would encourage you to do that. The rabbis certainly don't blush when it comes to things of sexual natures. But the more modern rabbinic rulings on this also take this view, and this is when we're going to look at something much more modern in discussing relations between a husband and a wife. The notes in the Jerusalem Talmud, and I've given you in my slide, I've given you a reference here. You can go look it up yourself. This note is probably written in the 1700s, and it states, "This is because whatever part of Wednesday, no matter how short, elapsed after the relations, it is counted as the first day. Thursday is the second day, and the opening moment of Thursday night, which is already Friday, is the third day." This actually, now once again, I'm not suggesting that this. I cannot stress it enough. I don't want people to say that I'm misusing these texts. I'm not suggesting that this looks at first century Judaism. However, it sounds a lot like our text, right? At least it sounds a lot like the suggestion by the Christian Church that Yeshua died on Friday, was in the grave Saturday, and rose in the morning on Sunday. Okay. So, after citing the passages from the Tanakh and the Talmuds, Harold Horner states, "The Old Testament gives the picture that the expressions 3 days, the third day, and 3 days and 3 nights are used to signify the same period of time." So, we have seen that the sign of Jonah was not a time period, but rather the resurrection itself. And I think that there's other passages. There's other passages in Acts that we could go to where they talk about the power of the resurrection. Anyway, so there's other passages we can go to see that it wasn't a 72-hour period, but rather it was the resurrection itself, which was the sign. We've also seen that if we were to take Matthew 12:40 literally, it would seem to directly contradict the multitude of references in the apostolic scriptures that Yeshua rose on the third day and not the fourth day. We've also seen that several different phrases seem to be used within the Tanakh that carried over into the first century. That is, after the third day, and 3 days and 3 nights, which all seem to be a shorthand for something besides a specific length of time. Pardon me. We have also seen that the idea of any part of a day constitutes the whole day continued into later rabbinical work, even into more modern teachings. Thus, it is my belief that the references we have in the scriptures of 3 days does not refer to 72 hours, but to something else. Now, I hate it when people have studies like this and then don't give you at least their opinion. And to be honest, I haven't done enough work to make a solid case for any one specific suggestion, but my current suspicion is that there was a reason 3 days was given for a dead body. Perhaps it was because of cases in which people were proclaimed dead but revived later. I've heard rumors of theories of the spirit of a dead body and things like this. Later rabbinics talk about this kind of thing. I can't point to anything in the first century about that, though. By the first century, 3 days seems to have shifted to a way of saying a person was truly dead. That's what I believe. If this is the case, then Yeshua's words in Matthew 12:40 would make perfect sense with what I have already suggested. That is, that just as Jonah was considered dead and gone, but then miraculously came back to tell the Ninevites to repent, so too Yeshua would be considered truly dead and gone, but then would rise from the dead, and in so doing would show that he was, in fact, the Son of God. Okay. I'm sure that there is going to be a lot of comments that I've already missed. And that's pretty much my presentation. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm going back to look through some of the comments. If you have comments right now, please post them. And I'm just going to Okay, so PJ, I'll just start at kind of at the top. PJ says the answer to Matthew 12:40 seems to defer to defining high day. You're talking about the high day or the high Sabbath. Is that? You're referring to the high Sabbath in John, right? Because it was a high Sabbath. Actually, Dr. Petrie takes a little bit different view on this than my father does, and I think Petrie actually might have some good points, and we'll look at those. Once again, I think that no matter what, it seems to me that you still have, even if you're going to say that I think that we have to reconcile the passages that I already showed in the Synoptic Gospels that say that it was the first day of unleavened bread, the day that the Pascha was sacrificed, right? So we have to deal with that. And it seems like what happens is they go and they take the Pascha and they take it to go get sacrificed. That's what they were doing, it seems to me. And not only that, but the first day of unleavened bread and the day that the Pascha was sacrificed, I mean, I don't know what else you would think the Pascha being sacrificed was. I know that other scholars, or I shouldn't say that. I know that, well, yeah, there are some other scholars who make some suggestions. I'm not too fond of their suggestions. And then there's other people in the Hebrew Roots and Messianic movement, such as Zach Bauer. He takes the view that the term, and I think Lex Myers does too, but I'm not positive about that. I'm actually interested to see kind of where Lex is going to fall on this. But I know that Zach Bauer, for instance, he takes the idea that the term the first day of unleavened bread, the day that the Pascha was sacrificed, he takes the view that that is a general time frame. However, we see in Jubilee, I think it's Jubilee, we definitely see in Josephus and we see in Philo. So definitely Josephus and Philo, we see that the first day of unleavened bread, the day the Pascha was sacrificed, they say specifically it was the 14th of Nisan. Nowhere in first century literature can I find, at least. I'm willing to be shown differently, and please, if you have reference, please go ahead and send it to me. I'd love to see it. But I can't find anywhere in first century literature where the first day of unleavened bread, the day the Pascha was sacrificed, refers to anything except for the specific day of Nisan 14. If that's the case, let's just pretend that that's the case for now. If that's the case, that would be a preparation day. And the next day, no matter what day of you want to say it is, John says that's a preparation day for the Sabbath. So we have to reconcile these two accounts, right? We have John saying that the day he died was a preparation for the Sabbath day. And we have all three synoptics telling us that when Yeshua was preparing for the Last Supper, and then the evening that he had the Last Supper on was the first day of unleavened bread, the day that the Passover lambs were sacrificed. To be able to reconcile those, even if we take the idea of high Sabbath out, even if we take that out, if we are going to make the Gospels line up, then I think that we have to say that we have two preparation days in a row. And I don't know how else we would reconcile that. And to be honest with you, even the people that I've seen within the Hebrew Roots and Messianic movements who have put forward timelines, they don't seem to deal with this, or they think that there was a day in between John's account and the synoptics. But once again, it still doesn't seem to me that that's the way the narrative plays out in either of the Gospels. It seems like he has the Last Supper, and then he's up all night, and in the morning they take him to be persecuted. This is one of the main reasons I believe that he died on a Friday. Let's look at some of these other comments real quick before we go. Saturday night, women walking around at night in Jerusalem. Were shops open then? So this is also another sticking point. Thank you very much, Shane, for the comment, and I know that you have many more comments here. I see that the conversation was going while I was talking, and I'm happy about that. So Shane, were there shops open on Saturday night? That's a very good question. I don't think I can answer that. That might be a good question to ask to Dr. Petrie. There's other issues actually that come up when we talk about whether or not shops were open or the idea of two Sabbaths in a row, because we see that Joseph of Arimathea goes, and one of the Gospels say that he bought the veil, the shroud, maybe not the veil, but the shroud to wrap Yeshua in for his burial. One of the arguments from some of the Messianic and Hebrew Roots people is that the women wouldn't have bought and prepared spices for him during the Sabbath. And these are all good arguments. I do kind of want to wait for Dr. Petrie because he's done great work on this. And I think that he's shown some very interesting outcomes. I can't say whether or not, I don't believe that the Jews would have had shops open during either of the Sabbaths, during the Sabbath of Nisan 15, which I believe was a Friday, or the weekly Sabbath, which obviously is always Shabbat or Saturday in my mind. I'm not a lunar Sabbath person. So would there have been shops open? I don't believe that Jewish shops would have been open. That I can say. So were they walking around after the Shabbat, after the sun sets on a Saturday? I can only give you a suggestion. I can't tell you whether or not they were or not. I don't have the answer to that. It seems to me that after two Shabbats in a row, that is a Friday Shabbat and then a Saturday Shabbat, if that's what was going on, which I think it was, it seems to me that shops would be open on Saturday night after the sun went down, because you have two Shabbats in a row. I know in Israel today, and once again, this does not inform us on first century Judaism by any stretch of the imagination, but in Israel today, as soon as the sun hits, as soon as it goes down, the shops open on Saturday night. And especially with two Shabbats in a row, if people need supplies and those kind of things, people have traveled for a really long way. Maybe they haven't had things, so it wouldn't surprise me if we had shops opening after the sun went down on a Saturday night. Let's keep going and see some of the other comments. I'm also trying to see if there's any comments on Twitter. No. So this is another one that I've heard from. This is great. Jeff, thank you for your comment. He says, should I eat my Seder meal at the beginning of Nisan 14 or the end? This is something that I actually hadn't heard until very recently, like in the past week. And it's suggested that actually the Passover Seder meals were actually being eaten let's try to lay this out so that I'm not misrepresenting. The idea is this: you have Nisan 13, okay, and this is not a preparation day. It's not anything, right? It's just a normal day, essentially. In modern Judaism, we know that it's the day that we get the leaven out of the house, right? Like completely out of the house. Obviously, most people are preparing for months in advance, but Nisan 13 is normally the day that we get the leaven out of the house in modern Judaism. In ancient Judaism, that might not be the case, but that's neither here nor there. So what I've understood is that you have the daytime of Nisan 13, and according to this theory, what happens is that as soon as the sun sets on Nisan 13, it becomes Nisan 14, right? And the suggestion is that the Passover Seder would be as soon as the sun set, and this is what it would mean between the evenings, okay? And for those who might not know, in the Torah, we have this very peculiar phrase that the lamb should be slaughtered between the evenings. And this could be we could talk about this for an hour, what between the evenings means. There's different hypothesis on this as well. And so Jeff brings up a great question. Should I have my Seder meal on the evening of the 14th? That is, as soon as the sun hits, dips below the horizon, Nisan 13, and it becomes Nisan 14. Is that when we should have the Seder? Or should it be after the day of Nisan 14 and the sun goes down, or the sun starts to go down? Should we start to eat the Passover Seder then? I think personally, I take the Pharisaical view or the later Pharisaic view that the Passover Seder meal should be eaten anytime from the afternoon of the 14th, once the sun starts to set, until the next morning. The reason that I take that view, and I know that people disagree with me on that, the reason I take that view is because the lamb had to be sacrificed on the 14th. It couldn't be sacrificed on the 13th. The Torah is very explicit about this. It has to be slaughtered on the 14th. So it can't be slaughtered on the 13th. That means that if we're supposed to understand, let's pretend that we were going to eat our Passover Seder meal as soon as the sun went down on the 13th. It became the 14th. Then what? Everybody goes to the temple, okay? And there's all sorts of different theories on how many people actually took a pilgrimage to the temple during the first century. But some of the views are 300,000. Josephus, I think, at one place even says there's 1 million people that would travel to Jerusalem. That the city of Jerusalem held 1 million people, and this is why people had to camp outside the city walls. They had tents and whatnot. So I mean, the number is extreme. Let's take a lower number. Let's say that 300,000 people all were going to have lambs slaughtered, and let's say that each 10 people had their own lamb. So you're not slaughtering 300,000, okay? I still think that the amount of time that it would take to slit the throat and pour the blood of that many animals would probably be pretty pretty extensive. You couldn't do it in an hour or two, right? And then what happens? You take the lamb, you take it back to your house, and I mean, all this is this is all very in depth. But you take it back to your house. It's the only time that they would roast it at home. They roasted it over an open fire, right? And it roasted essentially through the night. And we know that they would start to eat the lamb as it started to roast, and then throughout the night, or throughout the next however long, they would eat it until, well, according to the theory that I'm trying to put out here, it would have to be by sun up on Nisan 14. I don't think that there's enough time there for everyone who is coming to Jerusalem to actually eat the lamb from the time that the sun set till the time the sun rose, and you had to roast all of it. It had to be burned up by morning. You couldn't leave any of it. So I think that there's a problem there in terms of time. And granted, I'm the first one to admit that the later Mishnah cannot necessarily be read back into the first century. However, the idea that they roasted the lambs from 12:30 p.m. on the 14th of Nisan until just before the sun went down at this time of year, depending on if there was a leap year or not, it would be sometime around either between 6 to 7. Right around there is right when the sun would be going down. And so if they stopped at 5:30, now we have possibly enough time for them to actually slit the throats of the lamb, give them to the people, and the people to light their fires before the Shabbat started. That's what I think. But I'm willing to see other evidence. So my personal opinion is that you would eat the lamb in the afternoon of the 14th into the 15th. Let's see if we have any new comments. And sorry I'm late. No problem. Armstrong offshoots except for do the beginning of 14th, however. Leviticus 23 says atonement says from the 9th, meaning the end. You know, PJ, I'm afraid I'm not understanding your comment. Let me go to Jeff. I'll come back to it. Are we certain Yeshua wasn't put in the tomb at night? Wouldn't this allow for 3 days and 3 nights, and then also for him to be raised on the third day? Well, once again, going back to I forget what scholar it was that I quoted. I could give it to you again, but he's saying that in Mark, this 3 days actually, and this is why I included it because I thought it was an interesting McGinnis. He says that it's possible that the 3 days and 3 nights was from the time of Judas going against him or plotting on the 14th of Nisan. That's interesting. It's an interesting theory. But I think that, where is it? Somebody help me out. Is it in John? I think it's in John where it says that he was put into that he died and was put in the tomb around the 9th hour. That's 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The times are pretty specific, I think. But once again, online, especially when I'm trying to gain interest for these kind of things, I know I'm putting forward what seem like strong arguments. I'm willing to see any proof that somebody has or any suggestions. I'm always interested to see different theories because it's interesting to see how we try to work these things out. And once again, I think that this whole conversation is important for what reason? Why would we even care about this? It's not a salvation issue, right? Who cares if Yeshua died on on a Wednesday, on a Friday? Maybe he was in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Maybe it's just a phrase that meant he wasn't mostly dead anymore. He was fully dead. Okay, well, why would that matter? Well, there's numerous reasons why this matters. There's numerous reasons why this argument is a very important argument. First of all, this is one of the things that is used by people who reject the historicity of the Gospels and of the New Testament in general, and of the Bible in general, right? They point to this and say, look, there's tons of inconsistencies. I don't believe there are inconsistencies. In fact, I think it all lines up just fine. And I think that part of it is that we approach these texts from a 21st century linguistic mindset as opposed to a first century mindset. This is one reason I'm so excited to have Dr. Brant Petrie come onto the show. This is going to happen on April 12th. And I would encourage everyone to, even if you can't catch it live, come back and check it out, because actually I think we're pre-recording. So we'll post it on the 12th of April, and it's the Passover special. It's one of my favorite Rob and Caleb shows that we do all year long. And Dr. Petrie is really just a fun guy to talk to. And his book is dynamite. So, yeah. Okay. Nelson, if merchants who dealt in death preparation might have been open or available all the time because of the importance of quick burial, maybe their materials collected money after the end of Shabbat. Nelson, I think that, thank you for the comment. I think that I think you're actually hitting directly onto what I believe, which is we see in first century, it seems like in first century literature, I believe it's in Josephus. We'll have to ask Dr. Petrie about this because he's done work on this. But it seems that we have not only first century literature, but also we have later rabbinical literature that says that things to accompany a body to the grave are allowed to be sold and bought on a Shabbos. In other words, it's more important to accompany somebody to the grave than it is, it falls under the idea of pulling your donkey out of the pit. I know that sounds weird, but that's how the later rabbis interpret it. In other words, if a dead body, if somebody dies and it's Shabbat, you're allowed to go purchase things to prepare the body and all those kind of things. So I think you're absolutely right. And this is actually going to be a great question that we will talk about with Dr. Petrie. So let's keep going. Okay, so Leviticus, PJ, back to PJ, because I think he was making a point about Leviticus. So he says, Leviticus 23:32 shows that Passover is done at the end of the day, in that the same language is used for atonement on the 9th day, beginning at evening. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yet we know atonement is on the 10th. If you began the fast at the beginning, you would be fasting 2 days. So, okay, I think I understand what you're saying, PJ. So you're now we're talking about, this is back to the argument that the Seder and the lamb would be done at nighttime, right? Is that what I'm understanding from you? The other problem that we have, it's not just later rabbinical literature, it's that Josephus and Philo both talk about the sacrificing of the Passover lambs, and they say that it was in the afternoon. So, I mean, I think what I'm trying to say there is that we would have to find a reason why both historians, Josephus and Philo, both were incorrect about their recounting of the Passover and how the lambs were slaughtered. That's what I'm saying. Okay, back to Jeff. I slaughtered a lamb once. Okay, not a sacrifice. Derek, I don't want to distract. I just thought I misheard something. Did you say by I'm not a lunar Sabbath guy? That does mean that you don't believe that Shabbat starts Friday evening at sundown? No, that is not what that means, Derek. Thank you for having me clarify this, because this is extremely important for people to understand if you don't know. I believe that the weekly Shabbat, starts at sundown on Friday and goes until sundown on Saturday. What I mean by lunar Sabbath is that the idea of lunar Sabbath is that the Sabbath is reckoned according to the moon, so it's not always on Friday night. It's on a different day every month. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. Daniel 9:27 tells us that Yeshua would be killed in the midst of the week, aka the 4th day. This would mean that he rose on the 17th, which was first fruits. This would mean that he rose on the 17th, which in his day was first fruits. I'm not sure why you would think that the 17th was first fruits. I'm just trying to think through this for a second, because I'm assuming that you're referring to first fruit as the first day to count the Omer. Okay. P.S. Yeshua was crucified on the Passover of AD 17, equals biblical year 4000, or the very end of the 4th heavenly day, the Jubilee of the restoration of all things. Christian, I'm sorry, I disagree thoroughly. And I'm not going to get into first of all, no. I don't think that you could even assume to know that. And the reason why is because you don't know when they were intercalating the years. So that's number one. Number two, so we don't know what the astrology was. This is a huge subject and it's totally off topic, and I'm not even gonna go there right now. Also, Caleb, just FYI, the argument against that it was the first day of unleavened bread is that Mark 14:12 through 16 and Mark 26:17 through 19, the words are protos and hemera, meaning the beginning time period, not the first day. Yeah, but once again, I mean, I understand. I understand the argument, but I don't think it holds up. And the reason I don't think it holds up is because we have outside witnesses in the first century that are very specific about these words, about the same phrase. So, I mean, I do understand the argument. I just don't think that it's a valid. I don't think it's a valid argument. Christian says much evidence. No, I'm sorry. I disagree. Here's the thing, Christian, I'm not trying to discount your argument here, but the fact of the matter is that this is one of those topics where a huge amount of scholarship has been done on it in multiple different ways. I mean, if we're going to talk about Daniel and the prophecy in Daniel, I would refer you to my father's work on Daniel. He's done 9-part lecture series on it. I think that he's right in much of what he says, and so I would point you that way. And I'm sorry, I'm just reading these comments here. Okay, well, once again, if you want to discuss Daniel and whatnot, then that's great, but that's not exactly what this is about. I'm more worried about the time of Yeshua's death in terms of what day of the week it was. By which method do you count the Omer? Are you aware that there are multiple methods? Oh, I am certainly aware of that. So I count the Omer after I take what would probably be considered the traditional Pharisaic view, which is, and the way that the Pharisees later counted the Omer, which would be that, I think it starts on Nisan 16. Yes, and I know that there's arguments about that. Actually, you can go to Torah Resource and to my father's article, Counting the Omer. I think I'm going to draw a blank on the exact title. Counting the Omer in the First Century, Investigation of the Divergent Methods, those kind of things. Okay, I think that we're going to wrap it up. We've been doing this for an hour. I hope that this is helped in some way somebody out there. I certainly don't think that I've changed a lot of minds on this, and that's great. I'm always down to hear the different theories. I would encourage all of you to please come back on April 12th and watch our interview with Dr. Brant Petrie, who has written this wonderful book right here titled Jesus in the Last Supper. I think that he's right. He has 100 pages on the various chronologies that are found within the Gospels and the various ways that people work them out. And so I would encourage you to come back and check it out then. All right, thanks everybody for your time and for at least listening to me. Thanks.